how do you feel about what's happened to you, what's happened with the book, the fact the book was even born, and you're celebrating 1 year and it's now in paperback?
I think I'm just taking it all in.
Still?
Yes. I always say when I do things, I'm happy to be here, taking it all in. It's my new normal now. So
Yeah.
this is where I'm at.
I just thought a year on to ask you, Reni, what chapter would fall into that category, and you said it's the same one. So I'd like to ask you to read that chapter.
Okay, so I'm just going to read for you the blog post, which eventually became the book. So this ran into the world good over 4 years ago now. 4.5 years, wow. I'm old. Okay. I'm no longer engaging with white people on the topic of race. Not all white people, just the vast majority who refuse to accept the legitimacy of structural racism and its symptoms. I can no longer engage with the gulf of an emotional disconnect that white people display when a person of colour articulates their experience. You can see their eyes shut down and harden. It's like treacle is poured into their ears, blocking up their ear canals. It's like they can no longer hear us. This emotional disconnect is a conclusion of living a life oblivious to the fact that their skin colour is the norm and all others deviate from it. At best, white people have been taught not to mention that people of colour are different in case it offends us. They truly believe that the experiences of their life as a result of their skin colour can and should be universal. I just can't engage with the bewilderment and the defensiveness as they try to grapple with the fact that not everyone experiences the world in the way that they do. They've never had to think about what it means, in power terms, to be white. So anytime they're vaguely reminded of this fact, they interpret it as an affront. Their eyes glaze over in boredom or widen in indignation. Their mouths start twitching as they get defensive. Their throats open up as they try to interrupt, itching to talk over you but not really listen, because they need to let you know that you've got it wrong. The journey towards understanding structural racism still requires people of colour to prioritise white feelings. Even if they can hear you, they're not really listening. It's like something happens to the words as they leave our mouths and reach their ears. The words hit a barrier of denial and they don't get any further. That's the emotional disconnect. It's not really surprising because they've never known what it means to embrace a person of colour as a true equal with thoughts and feelings are as valid as their own. Watching The Colour of Fear by Lee Manoir, I saw people of colour break down in tears as they struggled to convince a defiant white man that his words were enforcing and perpetuating a white racist standard on them. All the while he stared obliviously, completely confused by this pain, at best trivialising it, at worst ridiculing it. I've written before about this white denial being the ubiquitous politics of race that operates on its inherent invisibility. So I can't talk to white people about race anymore because of the consequent denials, awkward cartwheels, and mental acrobatics that they display when this is brought to their attention. Who really wants to be alerted to a structural system that benefits them at the expense of others? I can no longer have this conversation because we're often coming at it from completely different places. I can't have a conversation with them about the details of a problem if they don't even recognize that the problem exists. Worse still is the white person who might be willing to entertain the possibility of said racism, but who thinks we enter this conversation as equals. We don't. Not to mention that entering into conversation with defiant white people is frankly a dangerous task for me. As the heckles rise and the defiance grows, I have to tread incredibly carefully because if I express frustration, anger, or exasperation at their refusal to understand, they will tap into their pre-subscribed racist tropes about angry black people who are a threat to them and their safety. It's very likely that they'll then paint me as a bully or an abuser. It's also likely that their white friends will rally around them, rewrite history, and make the lies the truth. Trying to engage with them and navigate their racism is not worth that. Amid every conversation about nice white people feeling silenced by conversations about race, there's a sort of an ironic and glaring lack of understanding or empathy for those of us who have been visibly marked out as different for our entire lives and live the consequences. It's truly a lifetime of self-censorship that people of colour have to live. The options are speak your truth and face a reprisal, or bite your tongue and get ahead in life. It must be a strange life, always having permission to speak and feeling indignant when you're finally asked to listen. It stems from white people's never questioned entitlement, I suppose. I cannot continue to emotionally exhaust myself trying to get this message across, while also towing a very precarious line that tries not to implicate any one white person in their role of perpetuating structural racism, lest they character assassinate me. So I'm no longer talking to white people about race. I don't have a huge amount of power to change the way the world works, but I can set boundaries. I can halt the entitlement they feel towards me, and I'll start that by stopping the conversation. The balance is too far swung in their favour. Their intent is often not to listen or learn, but to exert their power, to prove me wrong, to emotionally drain me, and to rebalance the status quo. I'm not talking to white people about race anymore unless I absolutely have to. If there's something like a media or conference appearance that means that someone might hear what I'm saying and feel less alone, then I'll participate. But I'm no longer dealing with people who don't want to hear it, wish to ridicule it, and frankly, don't deserve it.
The most obvious question I'm going to ask you on the back of that reading.
You can go on.
Yeah. You know, obviously you wrote that blog before, I would imagine, the book was even an idea in your mind, because you wrote it at a particular time for a particular purpose and very bravely put that online. And now it's a book, and then you're in a position where the very thing you said you no longer wanted to do, I would imagine you're negotiating and navigating that every day, and you're doing it maybe more than you would have anticipated. So how have you managed to reconcile that in terms of the book, the blog, which led to the title of the book, and the reality you're now navigating and negotiating?
Well, what I don't do anymore is participate in a sort of warped, conversations which are so far weighted in the white agenda's favour. And I'm constantly asked to be part of those types of conversations all the time. It's called the news media. And I just keep saying no. So what I'm doing, at least I hope what I'm doing with the book, is attempting to have a conversation on race in the terms that I think actually the conversation deserves, rather than having to constantly play catch up and respond to a very uncritical take on racism.
The aftermath chapter wasn't in the original book. You added it to the paperback
Don't ask
version.
me about this, Joy, because I can't remember what I wrote.
Oh, it's all right, I'll tell you.
Okay.
So, to me, that chapter, has anyone read the chapter, Aftermath? A few nods, okay. To me, that felt like it could have been a book in and of itself, and it felt quite compressed. I don't know if anyone felt like that. And I mean, just to say, you covered Grenfell, you covered the resurgence of white nationalism, Brexit, the vote. But the things that struck me, again, about the reality post the publication was what was trickling down to you. For example, you know, speaking to booksellers and finding out that booksellers were getting caught up in arguments not of their making, from irate, predominantly white people upset, one with the cover, two with the title, three with the fact that it was being sold in the bookstore, but also you celebrating, again, the resurgence of Black critical thought and culture. And we've got Akala, obviously, and Afua Hirsch at the moment, kicking ass with their books and with their discussions. So how easy or difficult was that chapter for you to write?
The book benefited from being timely, and that those conversations were happening at that time. And it's not something that I really anticipated. I think that, like, when I was writing the book and all the activism and writing I was doing prior to publication, I had like quite clear tunnel vision. Like, I was very focused on trying to do this particular work in this particular way, but I didn't really look at the news wider than that. So some of the things were as much of a shock to me as it was to everyone else. And then other things, like particular election results, were not that shocking to me. But that's because I was busy writing and thinking about racism for years prior to those things happening. And I was also writing, thinking about white denial of racism in particular. So, you know, those things like Brexit and Trump weren't particularly surprising to me. But it was just, frankly, a coincidence that everything coalesced in such a way that at a time when lots of people were shocked at the fact that Brexit and Trump had happened, my book came out. And I suppose people reached to the book for an explanation. That's not something I ever intended.
All you can control is the writing of it. Once it goes out there, baby's walking. You don't know where it's going to stumble into, bump into, who he's going to say hi to, or hopefully not be abducted. But what inspired you to write, and were there any, and to campaign and to fight? Because I noticed that word fight comes up a lot, even in your tweets, which we'll look at today, about your top 7 list, about coming up to the anniversary, what you're looking forward to doing. But yeah, who was your inspiration, either as a writer, as journalist at that time?
My inspiration, for better or worse, was the feminist movement that I was part of at the time. You know, while I was an activist, you know, in my late teens and early 20s, I was inspired for obvious reasons, and I was also like extremely disappointed for other reasons that I write about in the book. And so for me, that was probably the key driver. You know, it's no coincidence, and I always sort of mention this at events, that opening essay that I just read out, I wrote that a month after the incidents that I, you know, entail in chapter 5, because I was simply exhausted. So I was sort of like driven by, I mean, inspiration is not always it's not from a positive place, you know, like I was surrounded by these white women who considered themselves to be at the apex of progress in this country, and I felt like they were extremely regressive on racism, and I felt inspired by that, often frustrated. I don't know if inspired is really the right word. What's a negative version of inspired? Yeah, galvanized, to attempt to try and change that. Because, you know, I came up as a writer and activist around this time when, like, feminism was the conversation happening in the country, and it was just really like banging your head against a brick wall, being like, hey, there are other things that also go around, that also happen around structural discrimination that we need to call attention to. So yeah, galvanized, that's the word.
You're talking about feminism, a white feminist. I want to take you back to 13th of March 2014, when Julie Tomlin, my colleague who helped set up Digital Women UK, interviewed you for a blog on the site, and you said, I started my blog about 4 years ago, and I've been getting commissions in the last 2 to 3 years. I was writing the same stuff as any feminist writer, and then I started to write about race, and suddenly a lot more people were interested. I noticed that the more I put my neck on the line and spoke about structural racism on my blog, or in the mainstream media or on Radio 4, the more people, white women essentially, would challenge my testimony in a way I hadn't seen before when I was just writing about feminism. It tends to happen most when I speak on radio, with white women basically saying, we can't believe you on this one. On the other hand, so many different people of color and black and ethnic minority people get in touch with me to tell me I've verbalized their experience. The fact that you were verbalizing an experience, and I would imagine some of the questions will touch on that. How does it feel like hearing that now, and how that?
Well, hearing that now, because I haven't thought of what I said back in 2014. But the first thing is me thinking, well, you know, when I'm talking about the white women challenging my testimony, I'm thinking, yeah, because they were racist. Like, it's really just that cut and dry. I was very careful with my words then. Now I'm clearer to say those people were racist. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're willing to believe me when I talk about gender inequality, but when it comes to race inequality, you're like, oh, I don't believe you on that one. They're racist. So that's my first thought. And then the second thing I think is, you know, something about the impact of the book, that I'm now completely dumbfounded by this particular part of the impact, and this also links into this question of, oh, who is the book for? Which is that I often have people who are not white say to me, oh, thank you, this book's really verbalized my experience, like it's super validating. And I'm like, okay, so the book's for you. And then somebody else would be like, yeah, obviously the book's for white people, isn't it? And I'm like, oh, so the book's not for you then? Like, who's it for? I don't know. I'm confused at this point. Like, I don't know. So I just have to step out of the ring on that one and say, nothing to do with me anymore.
What do you think the success of your book indicates? Because obviously some of the ground that you cover has been trodden and exposed before. But, you know, there's no question that this book could not have been published 10 years ago. You know, this even possibly 5 years ago. So it's found its spot. It found its time. It's found its the right spotlight. And alongside the fact that you created it, it's been funneled and channeled through your lens. What has, how do you feel about that perspective? Go on.
My challenge is this, and I don't wish to be dismissive of the structural issues that has led to this situation, but it's nice that they know. But why did my generation not know? There's been some kind of communication block here, you know? And, you know, that's a problem, okay? And I can't have, you know, when I was a younger feminist activist, I would be on panels with women my grandmother's age, and I'd be trying to talk about racism and sexism and intersectionality, and I would be poo-pooed, and I'd be told by this woman my grandmother's age, oh, this is all old news, we've already gone over this. Well, I'm sorry that I was born in 1989. Like, what can I physically do about that? But there is an issue here, which is that knowledge hasn't necessarily been passed down. That knowledge has not been passed down. That's an issue because people my age and younger, and, you know, my brother's 21, and I always sort of think in the back of my mind, I would like to be writing in such a way that an 18-year-old can instantly get it. We didn't know, we didn't know. And I had to go and find it. That information's not been passed down. I don't know what's gone on with the black supplementary schools. There's not many anymore. This information's not in the national curriculum. So I'm out here having to reinvent the wheel because there's been a communication block. Well, and I would prefer that not to have been the case, but that is sadly the situation that we're in. And the fact that I had to go trawling through archives to find that information, that information shouldn't have disappeared. It's very frustrating.
The very things that you write about are the very reasons why some of that information, it's not even that it's not being passed down. I mean, you talk about, and I'm going to come back to that, about collective forgetting. Also, it's about where to look. Also, it's about the fact that some of that information, just like, you know, Hidden Figures, you know, the film Hidden Figures, everyone's going, whatever, but that was somewhere. And it's about the fact that a lot of this information, like seeds, have been spread around and we have to find it, and it's been passed on, but it's not been maintained, it's not been nurtured, it's not been archived. And I just think that we've got, you know, I think we have to put that into context. The very thing that we're writing about in terms of systemic and structural racism, and some of the casualties of that is how information is compartmentalized, and also some of that information is linked to trauma, so some people don't want to remember, and also the fact that we are in a unique position now where we can actually pull all those information together, because one of my biggest bugbears is that we just need one place so we can go to have this information, and then sort out the people before they pass, which is why the Wind generation is so important, to get those stories. And also a lot of us grew up in cultures where we not share my business with nobody. Let's be very clear. So I hear you, and at the same time, I think that's why we have to have these conversations, because
still it's frustrating to be a 28-year-old being told, oh, why are you saying this stuff? Like, we've already gone over it. I'm not saying that that's what you said.
No.
But it is something that I've heard sometimes. It is uncomfortable for people. It is uncomfortable for people. But, like, while we don't have this stuff on the national curriculum, and we keep learning about Henry VIII's numerous wives, which I understand is important, but do we need to learn it at that length?
No.
You know, it's a problem, and don't get me wrong, I recognise the structural issues. I recognise that in the 90s, you know, we had this government that attempted to almost dissipate things, dishing out funding, taking away funding, etc., etc. It's a massive, massive problem. The Black Cultural Archives only opened in 2015, and that, you know, one thing that I found, I think, while writing and researching the book was that, a local authority might put a little bit of money into memorializing a Black, historical figure, and maybe kids in that local authority would learn about that person during Black History Month, and that was it. But nobody else in the country would learn about it, and it was just it was really frustrating. And while I wrote it, I also thought to myself, do I really need to be doing this? This information is actually already out there, albeit in archival places. In fact, I remember when I was researching in the Black Cultural Archives, and somebody turned to me and they said, oh, where do you study then? which I think gives you an idea of who was in there, you know, like it was basically people researching for their dissertations. And then I thought, okay, the information is already out there, but people have to go and find it. And so I wanted to create a situation in where it was a little easier to find.
The thing is, you know, what's happening now, there's a publishing industry for whatever their motivation is now waking up to the fact all these books sell. So it's opened a window for more of these stories to come out.
Young British black activists who were organising against racism a few years ago were getting really good at being able to reel off the intricacies of the first black woman to run for president in the United States, but couldn't speak to anything that was happening or happened in Britain. And I was like, that is a serious problem. Like, that is a serious problem. And they had come by that information via social media and whatnot, and the same thing wasn't really happening in Britain. And I was like, this is a travesty. I mean, it's nice to know about Shirley Chisholm, but we're in London.
How are you looking after you, and what have you learned about self-care as a result of this?
I think that, you know, what I put on Twitter this morning, which was basically just lessons I've learned, was about, the first thing was fighting for the right to rest, because I think there's been a tremendous amount of interest in this book. And what comes with interest is constant requests on your time, which I cannot fulfill because there's just one me. And so I think I've just had to accept that I'm going to disappoint people if I want to have weekends. Like, I'm going to have to say, no, sorry, I can't do that if I want to see my family. Like, you know, so that's what I mean by fighting, because I don't think it comes from a negative place, but sometimes there can be a little bit of entitlement in terms of like, well, we love your work, so please come here, there, and everywhere. And it's like, just let the work do it for you at this moment in time. Like, can I sleep?
Expecting a yes.
You know?
They're asking you, but expecting a yes rather than giving the option.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think like I understand fully now after this year into publication that I'm not a public service, and like it's not a staff of 50, it's just me. So it's okay to say I'm not able to do that. And that's what I mean by fighting for the right, because, I tell you, it's a real back and forth sometimes to say, no, I can't do that. And what was the other thing that I said? Can you remember?
Oh, yeah, the other thing was...
See, this is my memory
about,
now.
about the fact that
I've been overwhelmed
you stopped, but the two, 6 and 7 struck out for me about the fact that you stopped reading reviews because you are, you get more critical engagement and interesting conversations at events like ours.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And also, like, you can have a dialogue with somebody at an event, whereas, like, if it's a review, you can't really do that. But I did tweet a while back that my mental health had gone sideways, and it's just like, it's extremely overwhelming. The interest is very overwhelming. And also I think like being in a position where, you tour the book or you take the book around to places, and then like for months after the book was out, like people kept asking me questions. I was like, what more is there to say? I've already written it down. Like, I don't have to keep coming out here saying the same thing. And then like, my publicist was like, this is part of the job. Like, you have to keep going out there saying, yes, that's this, that, and the other. So I'm a little more comfortable with that now. But also just like being a public figure, going about my daily business and people coming out to me, like that's not something I'm ever going to be used to, because it's not something that I anticipated or even courted before the book came out. So there's just been a whole bunch of, different things that have happened that I have to sort of like now accept that that's my new normal. And so that's my life now.
Right, I'm just going to end on your words, but from my mouth. Faced with the collective forgetting, we must fight to remember. And I'm going to leave you with that.
Thanks for coming, everyone.